I often see people working really hard to become securely attached. It's often after a breakup or before a relationship when they're trying to get back with a partner, often an avoidant partner. And it reminds me of myself from almost 15 years ago, where I went through my own breakup. And I want to share my story as a former avoidant trying to turn secure and how it almost ruined my relationship with my then girlfriend, now wife. And since I work with people who fall into the same trap, I want to kind of save you the pain. Hi, I'm Gabriel. I run the website simplytogether.co with my wife, Carolina. For those of you that may not know, becoming secure in your attachment style means that you are not afraid of loving or being loved, that you're comfortable with closeness, okay with distance, and don't need a relationship to really regulate your emotions. So it's an ideal we're kind of all striving towards. As mentioned, I went through a breakup about 15 years ago, and it really left me spiraling. I was in a bad place. I was having an existential crisis at the time. I had just left a dogmatic cult I was raised in, and my friendship circles were falling apart. There was just a lot going wrong on top of this breakup. And somehow that really inspired me to want to become more secure. Back then, attachment styles weren't trending quite so much. There were more terms like wholeness, safety, and confidence. But ultimately, they were all striving towards the same ideals of finding a secure attachment style. So I just dove right in. I was reading books, watching videos, taking programs, coaching, whatever it took, and worked really hard to try and become more secure in my attachment style. And a couple of months into that process, I met Carolina, who, spoiler alert, is my wife today. But we had amazing attraction, instant chemistry, but I was trying to abstain at the time because I was trying to become more secure. And I didn't want to need somebody else to have that sense of fullness and enoughness. So essentially, I didn't feel like I was ready for a relationship because I wasn't fully secure in my attachment style yet. And this is where I find some of the initial problems can start to crop up in striving towards a secure attachment style, because it can be misunderstood as seeking perfect self sufficiency, that you're kind of working on yourself and waiting to be perfectly secure and healed before getting into a relationship. In a sense, it's almost as though we're looking for this perfect safety from within where we don't depend on somebody else to have it. And in and of itself, I think that's a nice aspiration to be as self sufficient as possible. But when we take it to an extreme, we can really ruin our chances. So much so in the case with Carolina, had I pushed this too hard of saying, I'm not ready for a relationship now and I want to abstain and I have to first get secure and whatnot, she would have eventually have lost patience and just moved on. And I'm sure glad I caved and did not endlessly pursue the desire to become securely attached before getting into a relationship, because I may not have been with her today otherwise. So, this is the first way in which waiting to become secure first almost ruined my chance at a future relationship. Now, the second mistake I made that I see a lot of others make is believing that being secure by myself was the same thing as being secure in a relationship, because I felt pretty good on my own. I had done a lot of work. I had dug up my past, worked through things, built up my confidence, dealt with insecurities I had, and felt more secure and independent than I had in my life. I just knew myself a whole lot better. But the difference between taking this path solo and being in a relationship is that relationships don't just bring out our strengths, they also highlight our weaknesses and our innermost troubles and insecurities. And of course, in that, also provide opportunities to overcome them. But when we're stuck in believing we have to become secure first, we don't realize we're kind of operating in a vacuum, where it's a whole lot easier to self regulate, to be self sufficient. Because when I was in my relationship with Carolina, I was confronted with myself a whole lot more. I discovered I could be dismissive, distant, arrogant, avoidant, of course. And all of these things would never have occurred to me. I would never have been confronted with this had it not been for me being in a relationship with her. If I'm by myself, sure, you might have a friend that challenges you sometimes, but that's on the rarer end. Most people want to play it fine and not rock the boat too much. And the stakes are a lot lower in a friendship than they are in a relationship. So, this was another way in which I almost ruined my chances at a future relationship by really trying too hard to be secure first, independent of a relationship. Also, let me know in the comments what you believe your attachment style is. I'm curious to know. Now, the third trap and almost biggest way in which I almost ruined my relationship, and again, I see this with people a lot of the time, is that when you spend so much energy and attention and time in building a secure attachment style, you might start to think you have it all figured out. I certainly did. So that when I got into a relationship with Carolina, since I had done all the work and read all these books and understood so much of the theory, I was relating to Carolina from a place of believing I was secure and she was not. In other words, believing she was the one that needed to work on herself, not me, because I was ahead of the game. And I'm sure you can see how, if you are in a relationship and one of you is relating to the other as though they have it all figured out because they've read the theory or they have done the work or gone to therapy, whatever it might be, that it spells disaster because you don't have what we really like to emphasize today, this equal playing field of relating to each other as equals and operating as a team. Because the truth is, it doesn't matter how many books you've read, how many workshops you've been to, there is always more, and everybody's path to healing and becoming secure is different. Not everybody needs to go down this personal growth route. For others, life is a teacher, nature is a teacher, our friends and family can be. It all very much depends on what works individually for a person. So don't fall into the trap of believing you have it all figured out. We never do, just because you're more informed and maybe can articulate yourself better. In doing so, we actually set ourselves a huge trap in our relationships, which will set us up for serious disappointment and a lot of unnecessary conflict. Let's relate to each other on a more equal playing field here. Now, with that being said, I do understand how frustrating it is when you feel like you're the one who's putting in the time and effort to try and make things work, and it feels like your partner doesn't care, that they are maybe lounging around and kind of living your relationship on autopilot without trying to proactively address the issues that are definitely there, that you're not imagining. And sometimes it really boils down to just how you communicate this to them, how you illustrate the pain point without them getting triggered, without them getting upset. So if you've tried this many times over and it has not worked, you feel like you're hitting a roadblock, consider working with me. I can help you in a one-on-one call, and we can figure out a way to bypass all those defensive walls that kind of just automatically come up for them and convey your needs in a way that you can actually start having them met. If you're interested in that, I'll drop a link in the video description and you can check it out there. So with everything we've covered so far about aspiring to a secure attachment style, sometimes being a way of shooting yourself in the foot, I do want to emphasize the exceptions here, because there most certainly are exceptions. For example, you find yourself repeatedly in toxic or even abusive relationships, then you definitely need to first build some clear boundaries. You don't want to just jump into the next relationship. Another situation is if you tend to fully lose yourself in relationships, like your sense of self, any boundaries, then you probably need to develop a stronger sense of self and individuality before trying to get into another relationship. That can definitely help. And lastly, if you're overwhelmed with extreme anxiety, that results in damaging behaviors, whether that's towards your partner or yourself, that's also a good time to take a pause from relationships and work on developing a more secure attachment style. So, in conclusion, the lessons I would like to share with you based on my own experiences and those of many other people I have worked with, I want to say that we live in a day and age where we heavily rely on online interactions, and there's a lot of social atrophy. We function and work on ourselves in isolation often. We get through the day without having to speak to each other even much. You can order everything online, whether it's your food, your needs, even I've seen in Japan, they have these rent a parent or rent a girlfriend experiences. I don't know if you guys just search on YouTube quickly if you're curious. It's a service where somebody performs a social function in your life, right? You can rent a dad for a day or a mom or whatever it is, and they role play that for you. So we're at a point where we're commodifying our relationships. And though I can appreciate that for some people that works, it fills a hole, it's also sad that we've come to this point as a society, as a species, that we pay for human interaction. We are fundamentally social beings. Even if we're not in a relationship, we have our friendships, we have our coworkers, family. So I find that when we're putting too much emphasis on becoming securely attached in isolation, we're forgetting how we actually operate and that we need all these social interactions. And these are the mirrors that are held up to us. These are the things that help us grow. And it doesn't even need to be strictly a romantic relationship. Even just interacting with groups, with friends, teaches us a lot about ourselves. So I find that trying to be securely attached outside of a relationship is a bit like trying to learn to swim without being in water. You only truly meet yourself and learn about yourself in relationships, because growth and becoming secure doesn't happen in a vacuum. And this was my lesson too, that I became far more truly secure in my relationship, like really secure, where the rubber hits the road, where seeing and knowing yourself better than ever happens because you're confronted with your own shortcomings, your own limitations, that you maybe don't listen well, that you are oblivious to other people's needs. And your partner, of course, the same way, right? It's a two-way street where we can learn from each other. So the key takeaway here is that relationships are an endless journey. And true secure attachment and growth does not happen in isolation, but in relationships. It is easy to think you've got it all figured out when you're operating by yourself, right? But the moment you interact with somebody, it's a whole lot harder, and for good reason. Now, if you know somebody that you believe is operating in isolation and could do with this video, feel free to share it with them. And if you want to hear more about my journey from going avoidant to secure, you can click this video to watch my wife and I discuss it. Or if you want to know how my wife journeyed from anxious to secure, then you can watch this podcast episode where we also discuss at length how she went through her journey.